They say one man's trash is another man's treasure. But what if that treasure comes with something else? Something sinister? From cursed objects to haunted houses, today on Echoes of Fear, we bring you 4 terrifying true horror stories from yard sales across America, each one more disturbing than the last. These are not just ghost stories. These are real accounts of ordinary people who stumbled upon something they were never meant to find. So, before you step into your next garage sale, make sure you're ready for what you might take home. Let's begin. Clara Richardson, 32, had always loved searching for treasures at garage sales. That Saturday, she was driving through the quiet streets of Peabody, Massachusetts, when she spotted a handmade sign taped to a lamppost. Garage sale, everything must go. The house was an old Victorian, its once elegant facade now peeling with age. The overgrown yard gave the property an abandoned feel, but an elderly woman sat on the porch behind a table filled with dusty trinkets. Among the scattered items, Clara found a wooden jewelry box, intricately carved with floral patterns. The lid was slightly jammed, and the gold clasp had a green patina from years of neglect. "How much for this?" Clara asked. The woman, who introduced herself as Margaret O'Donnell, hesitated. $5, but she swallowed. "If you change your mind, please, bring it back." Clara laughed softly, thinking the woman was just sentimental, and handed over the money. Back home, she cleaned the box and pried it open. Inside, she found a few pieces of tarnished jewelry and an old black and white photograph. A family of 5, 2 parents and 3 young children, stood stiffly in front of the same house she had just visited. On the back, a note was scrawled in faded ink. "Please return to the O'Donnell house. Do not open." A chill ran down her spine. She quickly looked up the address online and was startled by what she found. The house had been demolished in 1998 after a fire killed the entire family inside. That night, Clara awoke to a faint whispering sound. Heart pounding, she crept into her living room. The sound was coming from the jewelry box. With shaking hands, she lifted the lid. The jewelry was no longer tarnished. It gleamed as if brand new. The photograph was different too. Now the family was staring directly into the camera. Their expressions were hollow. Terrified, Clara rushed back to the O'Donnell house the next morning, pounding on the door. A young man answered. "I'm looking for Margaret O'Donnell," she gasped. The man frowned. "The O'Donnells? That family died in a fire years ago. This house was rebuilt. No one named Margaret has lived here since." Clara looked down at the jewelry box. The photo inside was cracked, and now there was someone new in the picture. Herself. We've reached the end of the first story, and I want to ask something from you who are listening. If there's anything I can improve, whether it's the video's narration or editing, please leave a comment. Your feedback helps make the channel better, both for me as the creator and for you as the audience. Now let's move on to the second story. James Carter, 45, owned a small antique shop on King Street in Charleston, South Carolina. His Saturday mornings were spent scouring yard sales for hidden treasures. That's how he found the puppet. It was lying on a pile of junk outside an old 2-story home on Trad Street. Made of dark mahogany, it was a ventriloquist's dummy with an unsettlingly wide grin. The glass eyes seemed too lifelike, following James as he moved. The seller, a frail-looking elderly woman, hesitated when James picked it up. "My grandfather was a ventriloquist," she murmured, "but no one in the family wants this thing." James paid $1 and took it back to his shop. That night, as he was closing up, he heard a rustling sound from the back. He assumed it was a rat, until he saw that the dummy wasn't where he had left it. It was sitting on the counter, its head slightly turned toward the door. Over the next few days, customers mentioned hearing faint whispers. James began having nightmares of a pale man in a black suit standing in his shop, holding the puppet and mumbling strange words. One night, desperate for answers, he researched the dummy's origins. He discovered it had belonged to Ernest Wexler, a ventriloquist from the 1940s who had vanished under bizarre circumstances. His last performance ended when he abruptly stopped speaking, staring blankly at the audience as if he had turned into the puppet himself. The next morning, James found the dummy sitting on the front counter again. A yellowed note was beside it. In shaky handwriting, it read, "Thank you for letting me go home." James never saw the dummy again. If you're still ready. Third story. Emily Brooks, 28, found a vintage leather jacket at a yard sale in an old Portland neighborhood. The price was suspiciously low, only $10. The seller, a thin, hollow-eyed man, told her it had belonged to his recently deceased brother. Emily didn't think much of it and bought the jacket. The first time she put it on, she noticed a strange smell, a mix of mildew and something metallic, almost like dried blood. That night, she had a horrifying nightmare. She was running down an empty street, hearing footsteps behind her. But when she turned around, all she saw was a tall, shadowy figure. The next morning, Emily noticed something inside the jacket's lining. There were dark stains, old and crusted, blood stains. Uneasy, she did some research. To her horror, she discovered that a serial killer known as the Portland Reaper had once terrorized the city, wearing a leather jacket just like hers. His victims were always found the same way, throats slit, their bodies left in dark alleyways. Panicked, she tried to return the jacket. But when she went back to the yard sale location, she found the house abandoned and boarded up. Neighbors said no one had lived there for years. That night, she threw the jacket into the fireplace. The flames consumed it, but as the leather curled and blackened, she saw a reflection in the window. A tall man, watching her. Now, let's move on to the fourth story. Thank you so much to everyone who has listened this far. If you have a similar story to share, leave it in the comments. Your story might become the next video. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so I can continue bringing you this content. Now, let's finish this. Straight into the final story. Tyler Hansen, 22, a college student at Northern Arizona University, was driving through an old neighborhood in Flagstaff one crisp autumn afternoon when something caught his eye. A bright orange garage sale sign, slightly weathered and tilting to one side, was staked into the ground at the corner of an aging street. Below the bold lettering, an arrow pointed toward a quiet residential road, Oak Street. Curiosity got the better of him. He wasn't really looking for anything, but he had always loved finding old books and vintage oddities, so he turned the wheel and followed the sign. The house at 47 Oak Street was an old two-story Victorian with peeling white paint and a sprawling front yard, littered with an assortment of items. A friendly-looking family was gathered near the driveway, chatting with passing customers as they sold antique furniture, delicate porcelain dolls, and stacks of dusty books that seemed untouched for years. A young boy sat on the steps of the porch, idly spinning the wheel of a rusted tricycle, while a middle-aged woman carefully arranged a row of ceramic teacups on a fold-out table. As Tyler browsed, his attention was drawn to an ornate gold-framed mirror, its frame intricately carved with swirling patterns, reminiscent of something from a bygone era. The glass was pristine, almost unnaturally so, considering the age of the frame. Something about it fascinated him. It looked like it belonged in a grand mansion, rather than at a casual yard sale. "How much for the mirror?" he asked. An elderly woman, dressed in a lavender cardigan, turned to face him. Her silver hair was pulled into a neat bun, and her eyes, though warm, held an intensity that made Tyler hesitate. $15, she said with a soft smile. That seemed like a steal. He pulled out his wallet and handed her the money. "Come back anytime," she added as she took the cash. "We're always here." Her words lingered in his mind, oddly phrased, but he shrugged it off. He carefully placed the mirror in the back seat of his car and drove back to his dorm, eager to clean it up and see how it would look in his room. Later that evening, as he settled into his desk chair, Tyler turned the mirror upright against the wall. He was alone in his dorm, the soft hum of his roommate's fish tank, the only sound breaking the silence. Feeling amused, he pulled out his phone and snapped a quick selfie in the mirror. The moment he looked at the picture, his stomach twisted. The reflection in the mirror was not his dorm. Instead of his familiar cluttered desk and posters, the image showed an entirely different room. A Victorian-style parlor with floral wallpaper, oil paintings in heavy frames, and a grand fireplace with flames flickering warmly. Tyler's breath hitched. He turned his head to look directly at the mirror, but in real time it only reflected his dorm, just as it should. He stared at the photo again. The parlor was still there, the details sharp, impossible to mistake. A chill crept down his spine. His first thought was that it was some kind of glitch or maybe a hidden effect from the phone camera. He took another photo, same result. The strange, unfamiliar room appeared in the reflection instead of his own. His hands trembled as he set the mirror down. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. He needed answers. The next morning, Tyler drove back to 47 Oak Street, his pulse hammering in his ears. But as he turned onto the road, his breath caught in his throat. The house was gone. Where the Victorian home had stood just the day before was now an empty lot, overgrown with weeds, with nothing but a crumbling foundation marking where a house had once been. No yard sale, no friendly family, no porcelain dolls or antique furniture. Just silence. Panicked, he flagged down an elderly man walking his dog. "Excuse me, sir, what happened to the house that was here? The one with the garage sale?" The man frowned, then looked at Tyler as if he had lost his mind. "Son, there hasn't been a house here for decades," he said. "The place burned down in 1972. Whole family inside. No one made it out." Tyler's stomach dropped. His skin turned ice cold. He barely remembered getting back into his car. His fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly as he sped back to campus, his heart pounding with each passing second. When he finally reached his dorm, his hands were still shaking. He needed to get rid of that mirror. Now, he glanced at the passenger seat, where the mirror was propped up against the dashboard. His breath caught in his throat. The reflection had changed again. The parlor was gone. Now the room was dark. The fireplace had been reduced to smoldering embers. The floral wallpaper was peeling, and shadows stretched ominously across the floorboards. And in the far corner of the room, barely visible but unmistakably there, stood a woman with graying hair. She was smiling at him. And that was 4 true horror stories about yard sales. It's chilling to think how something so simple, a second-hand item, an impulse buy, can carry dark secrets and unseen dangers. After all, how often do we browse through these sales without wondering about the history behind each item? Is it really worth the risk? We want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced something strange after buying something used? Do you have any bizarre yard sale stories to share? Drop them in the comments. We'll explore these mysteries together. If you enjoyed this dive into the eerie and unexplained, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more terrifying stories here on Echoes of Fear. Every week, we bring you new tales that will make you question reality, and maybe even think twice before bringing a new treasure home. Thank you for watching and for being part of this journey into the darkest corners of human experience. We'll see you in the next video, if you're brave enough to return.